September 7th, 1940. Hermann Goering stands at Cap Blanc-Nez on France's coast, binoculars pressed to his eyes, observing squadron after squadron of Luftwaffe bombers heading across the English Channel. He's nearly smiling. The reason? Intelligence reports just delivered to him contain news that would thrill any military leader. RAF Fighter Command is essentially eliminated, destroyed, finished. Based on German intelligence analysis, Britain possessed roughly 100 functioning fighters remaining, possibly even less. The calculations appeared straightforward. Since August 13th, Germany had continuously attacked RAF airfields without mercy, an operation they called Eagle Day or Adler Tag. Kenley, Biggin Hill, Manston, Hornchurch. These weren't simply locations on charts. They'd become fields of destruction. Aircraft hangars crumbled like cardboard structures. Airstrips resembled lunar surfaces. Intelligence Chief Major Joseph Beppo Schmid had assembled detailed destruction reports. Documentation suggested catastrophic damage. Over a dozen principal RAF installations had sustained repeated bombardment. On August 15th alone, the Luftwaffe launched more than 1,500 missions, marking history's biggest single day of air combat until that moment. German aviators returned with gun cameras showing direct strikes. They'd witnessed the blasts, tallied the burning Hurricanes and Spitfires destroyed on the tarmac. Intelligence flooding Luftwaffe command centers described an air force in its final moments, dying on its own landing strips. But history reveals something fascinating here. Each morning following these crushing attacks, when German bomber groups entered British territory, they encountered formations of Spitfires and Hurricanes. Not scattered remnants, not isolated stragglers, complete formations. A dozen planes here, 16 aircraft there, launching from airfields that should have been obliterated. On August 30th by itself, RAF fighters completed over 1,000 sorties. This from an air arm supposedly possessing fewer operational planes than missions flown. The figures didn't simply seem incorrect. They defied mathematical logic. Goering became enraged. He blamed his aviators for inflating their victory claims. He challenged his intelligence staff. Could the British possibly be reconstructing aircraft overnight? Were they operating damaged planes barely held together by determination alone? The Reichsmarschall found it incomprehensible. His bombers had documented ruined hangars through aerial photography. His fighter pilots had machine-gunned parked planes. The craters existed. The flames were genuine. The devastation was captured on film. Still, the RAF continued appearing, continued resisting, continued materializing precisely where German assessments claimed they couldn't possibly survive. What Goering hadn't discovered, what his entire intelligence network had fundamentally overlooked, was that the airfields visible to them, those marked on standard maps, the prominent stations with permanent structures and clearly identifiable runways, represented merely a fraction of reality. Britain had constructed an invisible aerial force operating from locations German reconnaissance never captured because they never suspected such places existed. These weren't included in any pre-war documentation. They weren't recorded in intelligence databases. They were phantom installations, auxiliary airfields so expertly hidden that even when German reconnaissance planes passed directly overhead, they appeared identical to typical agricultural countryside. This wasn't fortune. This wasn't ad hoc planning. This represented strategic concealment performed at a sophistication level beyond Luftwaffe comprehension. The principle was elegantly straightforward. For every primary RAF station appearing on German intelligence charts, Britain had established 3, 4, occasionally 5 supplementary landing areas positioned within a 10-mile perimeter. These weren't conventional airfields in the standard definition. They served as emergency landing zones, refueling stations, and dispersal points that could operate as functioning bases whenever the main station faced attack. The official designation was satellite airfield, though that terminology suggests more formality than reality reflected. Numerous sites were essentially farmland that had been discreetly evaluated, leveled, and approved for fighter operations. Air Ministry strategists initiated this network's development as early as 1938, recognizing war's inevitability. They grasped a fundamental principle about air combat that Germans evidently missed. Concentration creates vulnerability. When you position 50 Spitfires at one location with established hangars and fuel storage facilities, a single effective bombing mission can eliminate your complete squadron within 20 minutes. However, when those identical 50 planes are distributed across 5 separate sites, concealed within forests and positioned behind hedgerows, the adversary must locate and neutralize all 5 positions to accomplish equivalent results. And locating them proved the challenge. By summer 1940, RAF Fighter Command operated over 70 satellite facilities throughout southern England. Some represented sophisticated installations with actual runways like RAF West Hampton near Chichester, functioning as Tangmere's satellite. Others consisted of little, beyond grass landing strips with several tents and fuel containers hidden beneath camouflage netting, yet every single location remained invisible to German reconnaissance. Luftwaffe pre-war intelligence had extensively charted Britain's airfields. They possessed exact locations for Biggin Hill, Kenley, Northolt, and other principal stations. What remained unknown was that these conspicuous targets had essentially become decoy installations of sorts. You could reduce them to debris, and squadrons would simply function from satellites the following day. Consider RAF Northolt in Middlesex. Germans pounded it relentlessly during late August. Photographs revealed cratered landing strips and damaged facilities. Objective achieved, correct? However, Northolt's squadrons, including the renowned Polish 303 Squadron, were already functioning mainly from Heston, a satellite installation just several miles southward. The Polish airmen didn't even stay at Northolt. They occupied requisitioned residences near Heston, where their Hurricanes remained dispersed beneath trees covered with camouflage material that made them merge flawlessly with surrounding woodland. Down in Kent, RAF Hawkina, positioned dramatically upon cliffs near Folkestone, appeared thoroughly demolished following repeated Stuka strikes during August. The operations center was wrecked. The hangars were skeletal steel frameworks, and the primary runway stood unusable. Nevertheless, 32 Squadron maintained daily patrol flights throughout September. How did they manage it? They'd relocated to Lympne and Detling, satellite locations inland that the Luftwaffe scarcely touched, since they remained unaware these grass landing areas now served as operational fighter installations. The system stretched from Portsmouth to Colchester, from the Thames estuary to the Sussex Downs. Fighter Command had essentially constructed a distributed, resilient aerial defense network. were eliminating visible facilities accomplished virtually nothing. The Germans played checkers, striking targets they could identify. The British played multi-dimensional chess, with most pieces concealed beneath the playing surface. Making an airfield vanish demands more than simply parking aircraft beneath trees. The engineering obstacles were massive. You require a level strip measuring at least 800 yards long for safe Spitfire landings. You need fuel reserves, thousands of gallons of high-octane aviation gasoline. You need munition storage, maintenance tools, facilities for housing aviators, and support personnel. Everything must function adequately to launch combat operations within minutes, while remaining invisible enough that a German reconnaissance Dornier cruising at 20,000 feet observes only farmland. The RAF's methodology combined engineering with stagecraft. Begin with the runway itself. Most satellite locations utilize grass strips instead of concrete or asphalt. Why this choice? Because grass resembles every other English field from altitude. Groundskeepers would deliberately cut patterns into the grass, replicating agricultural terrain, alternating sections of varying heights that from overhead appeared like a farmer had been cultivating. Some locations maintained actual sheep or cattle grazing directly on the landing strip until aircraft required it. Ground personnel would physically move the animals aside. Aircraft would land or depart, and livestock would return. Immediately afterward, one RAF corporal remembered watching Spitfires touch down between herds of cows that barely acknowledged the screaming Merlin engines. Fuel storage demanded creative solutions. Standard aviation fuel dumps with visible above-ground tanks attracted German attention immediately. Instead, satellite facilities buried fuel containers underground or concealed them inside fabricated farm structures. At one location near Roford in Kent, the primary fuel reserve for an entire squadron sat in tanks underneath what appeared to be a standard country barn. The structure was genuine, constructed from actual timber. However, the interior housed thousands of gallons of 100-octane fuel instead of tractors. German reconnaissance captured the barn numerous times. Intelligence never flagged it. Ammunition presented comparable obstacles. 8 Browning machine guns firing 300 rounds each consume 2,400 rounds per Spitfire sortie. Multiply that across 12 aircraft flying multiple daily sorties, and you need substantial ammunition storage. The solution involved distributing smaller ammunition reserves across multiple concealed positions rather than maintaining one obvious central magazine. At certain satellite installations, ammunition boxes remained stored beneath hedgerows covered with waterproof material. Ground crews would transport what they needed to aircraft using wheelbarrows. Camouflage netting represented another essential component. RAF utilized specialized netting that mimicked vegetation when observed from above. Aircraft weren't simply covered with generic material. Positions featured netting interwoven with genuine vegetation matching local foliage. At one site, in Sussex, maintenance personnel regularly replaced netting with fresh greenery corresponding to seasonal changes. During autumn, they incorporated dying leaves and brown branches. During spring, fresh growth. German photo interpreters examining reconnaissance images saw fields and woodlands. They observed reality, just not military reality. Perhaps most remarkably, entire satellite facilities operated without permanent structures, no control towers, no substantial buildings, no obvious infrastructure whatsoever. Command and coordination happened through field telephone lines strung through hedges connecting to sector operations centers. At Goodwood, located near Chichester, dispersal positions consisted of several canvas tents and a caravan serving as a makeshift operations room. When German bombers passed overhead searching for targets, they observed an estate with various outbuildings and scattered tents that appeared like temporary agricultural workers' accommodations. They remained oblivious that 12 hurricanes sat concealed within tree lines surrounding the property. The brilliance of satellite airfield operations extended beyond physical concealment. It involved operational deception. German intelligence functioned on conventional assumptions. Airfields possessed permanent facilities. Squadrons operated from established bases. Destruction of infrastructure meant elimination of capability. RAF demolished those assumptions. Squadrons became nomadic. Infrastructure became optional. The parent station's destruction became strategically irrelevant. This created psychological warfare advantages equally valuable as tactical benefits. When German aviators reported encountering strong fighter resistance despite intelligence confirming parent station destruction, it generated confusion and doubt. Pilots began questioning their intelligence briefings. If assessments claimed the RAF nearly defeated, why did combat experience suggest otherwise? This cognitive dissonance undermined German morale progressively throughout September. By mid-September, certain Luftwaffe units refused to accept intelligence assessments altogether. They trusted their own combat observations instead. Those observations revealed an RAF that remained dangerously effective. September 15, 1940, now commemorated as Battle of Britain Day, perfectly demonstrated the satellite system's effectiveness. The Luftwaffe launched what they anticipated being decisive strikes against London, massive daylight raids intended to destroy remaining RAF resistance. German intelligence calculated the British possessed perhaps 50 operational fighters remaining throughout southeastern England. His intelligence agencies had verified it. Nevertheless, German air crews encountered the heaviest fighter resistance throughout the entire battle. The satellite airfield network had generated an illusion of capability, actually more potent than genuine capability, because it persuaded the Germans they confronted an adversary that couldn't be overcome. Living and operating from these phantom installations bore no resemblance to conventional RAF service. Flight Lieutenant Tom Neal from 249 Squadron later recounted arriving at one satellite location near Boscombe Down and discovering absolutely nothing present. Simply a field, a wind indicator, and 2 petrol containers hidden beneath a tree. No officers' mess, no adequate accommodations, no administrative facilities. His squadron occupied requisitioned farmhouses 2 miles distant, traveled to the field each morning in civilian vehicles, and spent days sitting beneath their aircraft's wings, awaiting scramble alerts that arrived via a single field telephone connected to wires strung through the hedgerow. The difference from peacetime RAF existence was stark. Before the conflict, fighter pilots resided at proper stations with all the formality and organization of military custom. By September 1940, Squadron leader Peter Townsend's 85 Squadron was functioning from a field near Croydon, where the dispersal shelter was actually a farmer's chicken coop that had been cleared and equipped with several chairs and a field telephone. Pilots composed letters home seated on hay bundles. When the scramble alert arrived, they'd dash across a muddy field to their Hurricanes, which remained hidden behind hedgerows with camouflage material draped across them. The support crews represented the unacknowledged heroes within this system. These individuals, predominantly in their late teens and early 20s, were technicians, weapons specialists, and riggers who maintained the fighters operational under circumstances that would appall a peacetime engineering supervisor. At West Hampnet, Sergeant James Ginger Lacey's Hurricane was serviced by a 3-person crew operating from a canvas tent. They possessed no adequate tools, no workshop facility, no illumination except portable torches after darkness. When Lacey's plane sustained cannon damage over the channel, his crew repaired the wings with fabric and dope, working under moonlight, and the Hurricane was operational again by sunrise. Refueling and rearming had to occur at fighter tempo, not bomber tempo. At satellite installations, there wasn't time for standard procedures and safety regulations. Ground personnel at Rochford developed a method where they'd begin refueling a Spitfire before the pilot had even exited the cockpit, with weapons specialists simultaneously reloading the wing-mounted Browning machine guns. The complete turnaround, fuel, ammunition, basic inspections, could be accomplished in 8 minutes. That's how identical aircraft could complete 3 or 4 missions in a single day. The living conditions were similarly improvised. At Goodwood House, Polish aviators from 145 Squadron were accommodated in rooms featuring 18th century paintings on the walls. They'd rest in 4-poster beds, rise at dawn, cross the lawn to where their Hurricanes remained hidden in the forest, and conduct combat missions over the channel, then return for lunch in a dining area with crystal chandeliers. One Polish aviator, pilot officer Ludwik Martel, wrote to his family describing the bizarre experience of consuming breakfast from fine porcelain an hour after downing a Messerschmitt. Not all lodgings were so refined. At Merston, pilots rested in bell tents within a field. No plumbing, no electricity, no heating systems. They washed in a nearby creek and prepared meals over a camping burner. But they remained operational, and that's what counted. The satellite system transformed the entire RAF into something resembling a guerrilla organization, mobile, flexible, impossible to locate. Support crews became proficient at camouflage and hiding. Pilots learned to navigate using physical landmarks instead of charts, because their actual operating installations often weren't on any charts. The satellite airfield network didn't simply help Britain endure the Battle of Britain. It fundamentally changed Hitler's strategic thinking. On September 17, 1940, merely 2 days following the catastrophic raids of the 15th, Hitler released a directive postponing Operation Sea Lion without deadline. The official explanation cited unfavorable weather patterns. But the Führer's private discussions revealed a different account. He'd been guaranteed air superiority over southern England as an invasion prerequisite. Goering had promised him the RAF would be eliminated by mid-September. Instead, German bomber crews were encountering heavier fighter resistance than they'd experienced in August. The invasion mathematics demanded the Luftwaffe achieve absolute air dominance. Wehrmacht strategists estimated they required at least a 4-to-1 superiority in fighters to safeguard the invasion armada crossing the Channel. By late September, German intelligence still maintained the RAF was virtually finished, but operational facts told the reverse story. Every reconnaissance flight encountered fighter interception. Every bomber mission confronted squadrons that supposedly didn't exist. The disparity between intelligence documentation and combat reality became too significant to dismiss. Hitler's September 17th postponement became permanent by October. The satellite airfield network had produced a strategic deception far more successful than any intentional misinformation operation. The British hadn't deceived the Germans with fabricated intelligence. They'd simply rendered their actual capabilities invisible. The outcome remained identical: an invasion force that couldn't risk crossing the Channel because they couldn't ensure the air protection necessary for survival. The impact of Britain's invisible airfields reached far beyond 1940. The dispersal doctrine proved so successful that it became standard procedure for air forces globally. During the Cold War, NATO created elaborate networks of dispersed operating installations where fighters could distribute across multiple sites during emergencies. The Soviet Union constructed hundreds of auxiliary airfields throughout Eastern Europe specifically to withstand NATO's initial attack. Sweden's famous BAS-90 program, where Gripen fighters operate from reinforced highway sections, is a direct descendant of RAF Tangmir's satellites. Even contemporary air warfare incorporates these principles. The U.S. Air Force's Agile Combat Employment Doctrine, distributing forces across multiple austere sites rather than concentrating at major bases, is essentially the 1940 satellite system adapted for 21st century challenges. The Pentagon examined RAF Fighter Command's dispersal tactics extensively when formulating strategies for functioning in contested regions where permanent bases become liabilities. The technicians, aviators, and support crews who made this network function were predominantly ordinary individuals accomplishing extraordinary achievements under pressure. They took a desperate circumstance, German bombers annihilating their bases, and converted it into a strategic benefit by embracing invisibility and mobility. The Luftwaffe kept searching for the RAF at prominent airfields with permanent infrastructure, while the actual combat force was distributed across dozens of locations that appeared like nothing beyond English farmland. That's the genuine account of why Britain survived 1940. Not solely courage and Spitfires, though those mattered tremendously, but also the unglamorous effort of constructing fake barns over fuel, storage, positioning fighters behind hedgerows, and learning to operate an entire air force from locations that officially didn't exist. The Germans believed they were eliminating the RAF. They were actually just bombing vacant structures while the genuine war was being conducted from airfields they never discovered.